of the Gemara.
The Rebbe to learn Hilchas Beis Abchira B'Yimei Ben Artzor. We have the honor today to have a Choshev in Yerman, Arav Achosid, Arav Avraham Ashkenazi, will give us some insight into the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Also, the role of the Rebbe to give Tzedakah V'Tzibur. Everybody please give Tzedakah V'Tzibur. After my review, there will be a siyum. Arav Ashkenazi, bevakasha.
Thank you. There's a known machlokes between Rashi and Rambam. It's actually a machlokes b'metzius. Beneged urim v'tumim. There's a lot of pratim regarding this machlokes, but it's mainly what the urim v'tumim was exactly and how it was used, and exactly how it was used in all the details. The answer was given, what the Kohen Gadol did, etc., etc. This is explained in this Hilchot Sichos is brought down in mainly two sichos. We have in Chilek Yud Aleph Sicha Beis of Parshat Tetzaveh, and also Chilek Lamed Aleph Sicha Aleph of Parshat Tetzaveh. And later on, they printed both in the Chidushim B'Yurim B'Hilchot Beis Abchira. They put both sichos together in a siman, bringing the Rebbe's inyanim on this. So I just want to share a few nekudas mentioned. So the Rambam, this is in the first halacha of Perek Dalet. In Hilchos Beis Abchira, he begins by saying that like this Evan Hoisa b'Kodesh HaKadoshim Emarav, that there was a stone on the western side of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. This is the Evan Hashsiyah, and the Leo Aaron Munach, and on this stone the Aaron was placed. The front of the Tintenis Amon, Mate Aaron, and in front of the Aaron was the jar of the man and the Aaron staff. Then the Rambam continues by saying, when Shlomo Melech built the first Beis Hamikdash, he already knew that the first Beis Hamikdash will not be eternal. So Bana Makim Lignus Beiharin Lamata, he already built a place underneath the Kodesh HaKadoshim so that the Aron could be placed, etc. And then he continues by saying, and when before the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, before the Churban Bayis Rishon, Yeshayahu already commanded that they should move the Aron to this place, and as we know, it's still there and it wasn't taken out by the second Beis Hamikdash. He brings the pasuk, and then he says, that together with the Aron was also the Mate Aron and its incentives and the Shemen HaMishcha. These all items were hidden, and then he says, all of these were not brought back by Beis Sheni. So by Beis Sheni we didn't have all these items. Then he concludes the halacha by saying like this: and even the urim v'tumim, and then he says, which was during the second Beis Hamikdash, they were not used to answer questions, and of course they were also not asked questions. Some Mefarshim ask why the Rambam brings twice. In other places he only says one of them, but he says brings a pasuk. It's a pasuk in Ezra and Nehemiah. Also the Rambam brings different gifts of the from these two Mekodes. But regardless, the Rambam brings that the Urim V'Tumim was there, but it was not being used. And the only reason why the Urim V'Tumim was there was for the purpose that the Kohen Gadol should have all 8 garments. So as we know, in Mechusar B'Godim, you're not allowed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Now the Ravid asks there on this halacha, this is the pretty much, I skipped some lines, but this is pretty much the first halacha in Perek Dalet. The Ravid asks what Mefarshim say, that it's actually 2 questions. He says like this: Urim v'tumim v'ruach hakodesh shnei dvarim heim min hachamisha shechasu b'bayis sheni uledvarav einoi ela echad. We're going to explain what this question is. And then the second question that he asks, it says v'chisu b'godim she'amar einoi klum she'einoi mechash b'na b'godim. So let's explain what the Ravid is asking. So the Gemara in Yuma, this is on Chavalev on the base, brings a list of 5 things which were, and the Gemara says there were 5 things that were in the first Beis Hamikdash, but were not in the second Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara lists, but when the Gemara actually lists 7 things. But the Gemara says like this: Ve'elohein, these are the 5 things that were found in the first Beis Hamikdash, but not in the second Beis Hamikdash. Aaron v'chaperes v'chruvim, Eish, Shechina, v'ruach hakodesh, v'urim v'tumim. Okay, so these are 7 actually. But then of course Rashi brings the Gemara explains that the first 3 are actually one. So when he says Aaron v'chaperes v'chruvim, it means one unity, the Aaron with the cover and the kruvim. And then number 2 is the Eish on the Mizbeach, the Shechina wasn't there in the second Beis Hamikdash, Ruach HaKodesh, and 5th is the Urim V'Tumim. That's what Rashi brings down the Gemara. The Rambam according to the Kesef Mishnah, and many Mefarshim say that the Rambam's opinion is that it's the opposite. It's not that the first three were considered one, the last three were considered one. So you have Arin, Kapoeres, and Kruvim are three different ones, and then you have Eish is number 4, and then the fifth is Ushchino, V'ruch HaKodesh, V'urim V'tumim. All these three things are considered one. So we have already a machlekes between Rashi and Rambam, according to most Mefarshim, the way they explain that Gemara. And then based on that also, you have also machlekes between Rashi and Rambam, which I mentioned at the beginning, which is what was the Urim V'tumim that we are talking about. So the Rashi, he brings also in Chumash, Parshas Tetzaveh, the Rashi brings there by Al Torah, he says that the apostle that says that you have to put the Urim V'tumim, the Rashi brings down that Urim V'tumim was a cloth, it was a parchment with the Shema Mefredash. Others say there was Shmei Kedoshim, and this cloth was placed between the window. The Choshen was folded. Zeres Arkev, Zeres Rachbei, when it was folded. So inside this Choshen there was this cloth with the Shema Mefredash. According to Rashi, that was what the Urim V'tumim was. And Rashi brings in the Gemara that in the Chumash also that the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, the Urim V'tumim was not there, meaning this cloth was not there, was not present. We didn't have this cloth inside the Choshen during the second Beis Hamikdash. According to Rambam, however, the way that most Mefarshim explain, there was no such thing as a cloth. The Choshen themselves, the Avnei Choshen, the names of the Shvatim on the Choshen, that's what the Urim V'tumim was. So we already have this major machlekes, which is the Metzius, like I mentioned earlier, between Rashi and Rambam. And then you have other shittas. You have shittas Ateisos that someone explained that's like shittas Rambam, that there was no cloth, and the Urim V'tumim was the Choshen itself. But others say that Ateisos' opinion is no, that it was like Rashi, that there was a cloth. Elamai, Rashi holds that during the second Beis Hamikdash the cloth wasn't there. But Ateisos holds that it was there, but it wasn't effective. It didn't work. But then you have many other different shittas, and if exactly the Rambam holds like this or Rashi holds like that, and many other opinions about this. And of course, you have all questions for both sides, side based in the Psukim and Chumash, and also the Gemaras that we learned, and other places in the Gemara, questions both ways, and there's different ways to explain. Now, this is basically what the Rebbe brings down in both of those places, and part of those sichas in Chelek Yud Aleph and Chelek Lamed Aleph. Then we have in another sikha, this is in Chelek Chaf Aleph, the second sikha of Truma, where the Rebbe asks on this halach in general. The Rebbe asks a question: why is the Rambam bringing this whole story of the Arin being hidden, and the Tzenes Amon, and the Shemer Mishcha, and all the other stuff, and also the Urim V'tumim? Why is that practical? We know the Rambam is Sefer Halachas, Mishnah Torah. So why is that so negea what the story was in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash? We know, of course, that in the times of the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi, we will have all these things. So why is it important for us to know when we're learning Mishnah Torah all these details about what happened in the second Beis Hamikdash? And the Rebbe also asks, and he's going to answer based on explaining this question, is why is it that this halacha the Rambam brings in the Perek Daled of Hilchos B'Sabechira? The Rebbe says that the Seder Avari, but more or less, the way the Rambam brings the Hilchos B'Sabechira, you have Perek Aleph, which brings about the general idea of B'Sabechira, the mitzvahs and some pratim, and then you have Perek Beis and Perek Gimel that speak about the Kelim, and then from Perek Daled and on, mainly Perek Daled and the following Rakim, you have more about the Tzudas Habayis and the Binyan itself, the Midas, etc. So the Rebbe asks the question: why is it that this idea of the Arin is brought down in the beginning of Perek Daled and not earlier in Perek Beis or Perek Gimel, where we're talking about all the other Kelim? Now, of course, the Pashut answer will be that the Rambam began that halacha by saying that the Makim, we're talking about the stone on the floor, and then the Rambam mentioned bypassing the Arin, but the Rebbe wants the more clear answer. There's other ways to answer also, which you can say that there's a difference between Arin and all the other Kelim in many areas. Just to mention two of them is that when Mashiach comes, we'll have to reconstruct all the other Kelim. Mashiach and Arin, as we mentioned earlier, it's already there. It's being hidden since the Zman by Sedishin, so that we won't need to construct the Arin. Mashiach and all the other Kelim will have to be reconstructed. Another difference between the Arin and other Kelim as well is that in many aspects, the Arin is not considered a Kli Sharis. It's not something that you use to serve something. It's not like a Menorah, like a Shulchan, or all the other Kelim. Most of the Kelim that were used for a service. Mashiach and the Arin were just sitting there in the Arin, the Kiddush HaKadoshim, and it wasn't used for something. And of course, we have the differences of how it was carried, etc. But still, the Rebbe is asking the question: why is it that the Rambam brings the halacha of the Arin in Perek Daled and not in Perek Beis or Perek Gimel? Just by the way, the Harad Alma, I saw last night somebody mentioned from Sikha of Parshas Dvarim, I think it was Toshin Memvav, where the Rebbe mentions that the 8 prokim of Hilchos B'Bechira, it's connected to the first 8 days of Chodesh Menachem Av that we're supposed to learn. I mean, there's a connection between Perek Aleph and Aleph Menachem Av all the way to Erev Tisha B'Av before Chatzos when you learn the last Perek. So Perek Dalet is this year is connected to Shabbos, which I mean is Mizbarach and Kol Yomim, so we can talk about it today as well, even though today would be Perek Vav. And anyways, so the Rebbe has this question. So the Rebbe explains that in fact the reason why the Rambam, we can say why the Rambam is talking about the Arin in this regard. We ask why is there Keli. So the Rebbe says in this regard we can say that the Arin is actually considered part of the Bais, meaning that the Arin was not just like any other Keli that was in the Beis Hamikdash, but actually was an integral part of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And then the Rebbe goes on to explain at length, it's a known tzricha, that how the Arin Kodesh was hidden. According to Rambam, it was still considered part of Kodesh HaKadoshim, even though it was in a hidden place, it wasn't revealed, it's concealed, but it's still part of Kodesh HaKadoshim. And even during the Bais Sheni, when the Arin wasn't in a regular place, but it was still part of being part of the binyan. So that's why the Rebbe says it's connected to the actual binyan, and that's why it makes sense to have this halach in Chelik Dalet. And now the Rebbe adds there that we must say also the same thing beginning the Hamshech of the halacha, not just the Arin, which is the beginning of the halacha, but also the Urim V'Tumim, which Rambam brings the second part of the halacha that we learned. That also you must say that it has a connection to the binyan of the Beis Hamikdash, just like the Arin. Also the Urim V'Tumim, even though it's the Rechagav, the Rambam already said about the Arin not being there, it's the Hamshech of the Gemara, the list of five things that we already mentioned, but nevertheless you can still say that the Urim V'Tumim themselves also have a connection to the binyan of the Beis Hamikdash. Now what's the connection between those two? The Rebbe explains that specifically according to the Rambam, the idea that the Urim V'Tumim was there. We remember that according to Rashi, during Bais Sheni, the Urim V'Tumim wasn't there anymore because the Klaf wasn't in the Choshen. But according to Rambam, and they have a whole discussion and the question of the Ravid, how could it be that it was Mechus Godim? But according to Rambam, everything was B'Shli Musay. The Choshen was there. Elamai, the power of the Urim V'Tumim wasn't there. The Ruach HaKodesh wasn't there. Okay, I forgot to mention a little bit more in detail about the Ravid. If we have time, I'll go back and explain a little bit more. But the concept is, the Rebbe says that according to Rambam specifically, even according to Rashi, but how much more so according to Rambam, we see that the same way that the Kodesh HaKadoshim was B'Shlimusei, because the Arin was there hidden, so too the Choshen, according to Rambam mainly, even though it wasn't, the Urim V'Tumim wasn't in effect, but the Urim V'Tumim was B'Shlimusei because nothing changed in Metzius in that sense. Okay, let's go back and just explain the Ravid a little bit, what the question was, because we have 2 more minutes left, and then we'll conclude. So the Ravid's question was, he asked on the Rambam 2 questions. He asked, why is it that the Rambam is saying that, he says, Shnei Dvarim Heim. The Ravid thought that the Rambam's opinion was that the Urim V'Tumim was like what Rashi holds, which is a klaf. And therefore, when Rambam says that, Rambam says like this, that the Urim V'Tumim wasn't by Sheni, Elamai, it wasn't being used. So Ravid asks the question, how could it be? It says in the Gemara that there was no Ruach HaKodesh, and there was no there's no Urim V'Tumim. So what does it mean? How can you say that there was? So the answer to Ravid is what all Mefarshim say is no. Rambam doesn't hold like Rashi. Rambam has his own shita that the last 3 items of the list of 7 that we mentioned in the Gemara is all considered one. So when Rambam reads the Gemara and it says the Shechina, the Ruach HaKodesh, and the Urim V'Tumim, it means all one thing. Elamai, the Urim V'Tumim was there, but the Ruach HaKodesh wasn't there, and that's the one thing that Rambam holds. Mashenker, according to Rashi, you must say that the Urim V'Tumim wasn't there, so the Klaf wasn't there. Okay, there's different, according to some Mefarshim, both according to Rashi and according to Rambam, there's different ways to say if Ruach HaKodesh meant the Nevuah, which was something else that stopped in the beginning of Zman Bais Sheni or not. Okay. Now the second question that Ravid asked was Benegia the Chisur Godim. That also it's answered according to what we said, that according to Rambam, there was no Chisarin at all. The Choshen was there, Elamai, the power of the Urim V'Tumim wasn't there, so there's no question whatsoever. And when the Rambam says that the reason why the Choshen was there was only for the Bechus of Godim, that's what he means, because the Choshen itself was the Urim V'Tumim, unlike Rashi, which has to have a problem, so to speak. You have to say that the Klaf was not part of the Choshen, and therefore there was no problem of Bechus of Godim. But if you say that the Klaf was part of the Choshen, then you have a problem of Bechus of Godim. According to Rambam, however, there's no question whatsoever. Even in the times of the Bais Kishan, there was no Klaf. The Choshen was the Choshen, and the only difference is that the Zman by Sheni, the Choshen was not, didn't have the power. So just to conclude by bringing what the Rebbe brings in a different Sikha. No, sorry, in that same Sikha, one of the Sikhas that we mentioned earlier, this is in Chelek Yudalev, the Rebbe concludes by saying, I have it here, 1 second. So the Rebbe concludes the Sikha by bringing, it's a Sikha on Perish Rashi, on Tetzav, and the Rebbe concludes by bringing from Yena Shotena, the Rebbe brings Benegea, the idea that according to Chassidus, there was no difference between the Oir, the Giloi Elikus, between Bais Rishon and Bais Sheni, and by both the Oir was there. The difference is, according to Chassidus, that in Bais Rishon it was something that it could achieve the whole world. Mashiach in Bais Sheni, it's something that there was only, it was not, didn't affect Gvulin, it was only in the Bais itself. So the Rebbe goes to explain how this is also represented in the way that the Urim V'Tumim did not function in the second Beis Hamikdash. In the Urim V'Tumim, we know that the Urim V'Tumim was mostly used for communal and national problems. Anytime there was something that affected the whole world, mainly, or even in Yisrael, something affected the whole world. So this is also represented in the Urim V'Tumim. And the Rebbe says that similarly in Galus, not just the Mishpat is concealed, but even the Choshen, we don't have not just the Urim V'Tumim, but nowadays we don't even have the Choshen accessible to us, as opposed to even the Zman by Shein. And the Rebbe brings to the Kutas Benegea the word Choshen. He brings from Reb Chaim Vital writes that Choshen has the same letters as the word Nachash, which this stock represents Nachash HaKatbani. So the Rebbe says it's something negative, but at the same time we also find that Rabbi Ephraim, one of the Balatistas, writes that Choshen is the gematria of Mashiach, has the same gematria of the word Mashiach. And the Rebbe says that the Zman HaGolus, is because of our sins. Also the Rebbe says Mashcha the Chivya, the idea of a serpent's skin. So there are Avedas to make from Nachash into Choshen, to change from something which is concealed into something revealed, and then it's going to be a Choshen Mishpat. Maybe Zoiche to accomplish this before this Shabbat.
Shkoyach. Right after my there will be a seal. Shkoyach.